unless something fundamental changes, Nigel Farage will be the next Prime Minister of this country. And knowing him as well as I do, that will open the door to wholesale, radical change in this country. A lot of which the establishment will hate. If you think you saw an establishment backlash with Liz Truss, you ain't seen nothing yet. They will do everything they can to disrupt and delay and disturb a reform government. They will do everything. But the other quality about Nigel Farage that I would just point out is they've thrown everything at that guy since he popped his head up in the early 1990s, and he keeps on going.
Good. Matt, good to see you again.
Thanks for having me back.
You've been busy?
Yeah, politics has been getting a little bit bumpy, as predicted in our last conversation, actually.
Yes, I really enjoyed you on Question Time. I really enjoyed Constantine was on Question Time. I really like there's people going on there and unsettling the established elite. Yeah. They look very uncomfortable when you point things out, and Constantine does. I fucking love it.
Do you know what's funny about Question Time? In the green room afterwards, someone very famous who will remain nameless came up to me and said, and I'd just been on the show, I'd been critiquing mass immigration, broken borders, London-centric economy. And they said, you know what? It's so good to have your perspective on this show. It's so good to have your views included. And I sat there and I thought, you mean the views of the average person in Britain at the moment, which is basically, I'm not down for this mass migration. I'd like somebody to control the borders. Yeah. This economy is not working for me and my family. And I think Keir Starmer's not really delivering the goods. And I was just struck, the BBC, you don't expect to see it that brazenly, just how out of touch they are. But that really brought it home.
Well, I think the cracks are appearing for everyone right now. I mean, I've always liked Question Time. But what became very obvious to me, and I think it came out on Twitter yesterday, somebody was discussing this, that they're clearly planting people in there now and planting questions because it's very obviously not reflecting the temperature of the nation at the moment. And the reason I say that is because one of the most interesting things about reform that I think is interesting is that I can't class their voters because I am meeting rich business owners who are saying they're going to vote for reform, middle class friends said they're going to vote reform, and working class people. It's across the scale. And I think it's gone from protest vote to what else can I vote for?
Yeah, absolutely. Just on the BBC thing, though, I think there are two things that are interesting. So I've done all the top shows, Question Time, Any Questions, Politics Live. So without doubt, the audiences the BBC have, even though they sometimes bring in professional pollsters to choose them, there's no way those audiences are representative of British society. I used to be a pollster myself. I mean, the reactions I've got for pretty mainstream views have been bizarre, right? The second thing, though, is they don't do this. Like what we're doing is we're having a long form conversation. You let me answer the question. Maybe you disagree, maybe you agree, whatever. Now, if we were doing this on BBC Radio 4 today, you would ask me a question. I'd be sat here in the studio. And the moment I start speaking, you would be like, yep, keep it short, giving me the cues, like shut up, basically. You cannot have long-form conversation on the BBC, particularly if you're critical of the liberal consensus that unites the BBC top tier, right? That's basically the reality of the situation. So, on the reform thing, it's part of the reason why reform are doing well. Everybody out there consents a national conversation isn't really representing their values and voice. If you look at the remarkable results that reform had at the local elections, the mayoral elections, that by-election in Runcorn and Helsby, this realignment that we're seeing of politics post-Brexit, the Conservatives squandered that, Boris Johnson squandered that. Nigel Farage inherited that realignment. He's now expanding that realignment. Reform are doing really well in Remainy areas as well as Leave areas, are doing well among the young, stronger than the Tories among the young, doing quite well among professionals as well as workers, doing really well in Wales, doing quite well in Scotland. So you've got the building blocks, I would argue, for a truly national movement that is speaking for the people against this elite minority that's been imposing all of these really unpopular policies on us that we don't like, soft on criminals, pro-mass migration, losing control of the borders, two-tier policing. And actually, I think Nigel Farage has probably got, and the people that are working with him, the biggest opportunity to reshape British politics since the rise of the Labour Party in the early 20th century. I genuinely think, Peter, what we're witnessing at the moment is one of the most historic moments in British politics.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by it. We had Anne Widdecombe in here the other day. I think
she's great.
She's
like I thought I could give a reasonably good speech, and then at a conference I was followed by Anne Widdecombe, who was like, I don't, how old's that? That's rude of me to speculate, but I mean, she went onto the stage, literally blew the place apart. It was unbelievable. The energy in Anne Widdecombe is insane.
Yeah, I mean, I thought she was fantastic, but I think it was her. She said, I can see it in, I might get some of this wrong, but 10 to 20 years, the two main parties will probably end up being Reform, Lib Dems. She thinks both Labour and Conservatives are essentially cooked.
Yeah, I think you could basically see a situation where, and you see it now in the polling, so Starmer's Labour are getting squeezed on two sides simultaneously. You've got the Lib Dems, the Greens. There's an interesting question mark about what if you put somebody competent on top of the Greens, by the way.
They're all communists.
The Greens long term, right, have got pretty good potential because they're tapping into the radical left students, right, the kind of gradually increasing block of university students, but also, to be frank, the Islamists as well. They're tapping into that kind of pro-Gaza identity politics group where in some areas of the country, that's doing particularly well. And then on the other side, Labour not only getting hammered by Greens and Lib Dems, but also, obviously, by Nigel Farage and Reform.
What? When did this come out?
Yeah, so this was this morning. So 30%. Now, the reason that Reform are doing 30% is they are now taking more than half of all people who voted Brexit. So they've got about 53% of Brexit voters. They're getting a third of Kemi Badenoch's 2024 Tory electorate, and they're getting a lot of the none of the above, people that reject everybody in politics, who we were just talking about before the show began. And now, look, I used to have debates with people like Dominic Cummings, right? And they used to say, Nigel Farage will never get above 15% of the national vote because he's so toxic, he's so polarizing. Guys, he's on 30% of the vote. I consistently said, if you turn Nigel Farage into a household brand, which he's done, to his credit, through I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, to doing non-political stuff, if you just expand the brand a bit, he will become the hottest political product that we've had in this country, really, since New Labour. And that is what is happening. That's what you can see in those numbers.
That is wild. 32%. I mean, look, it's so weird because I don't really know I certainly don't know what Labour are anymore. I used to know what they were. Yeah, they were a working class vote. They were a unions vote. They were, they used to feel they cared about the people struggling most in society, hardworking people maybe up north, or maybe certain suburbs of the UK. But I don't know what they stand for anymore because they seem to be trying to react to Reform. They've had some policies that kind of nod towards conservatism, but they're kind of weak. And they are rejecting their base. I don't know what they stand for anymore. And then I look at the Conservatives and I similarly don't know what they stand for. I mean, they've been given a blueprint. Nigel Farage has given them a blueprint and they've ignored it.
Well, they created Nigel Farage by pretending to be a Conservative party and becoming a Liberal party. Yeah. That's basically what happened. I mean, I remember years ago making this argument at the time of Brexit. I said to the Conservatives, a week after the referendum, I said, this is it now. This is an opportunity for you guys to reshape yourselves around this Brexit divide and take over the country, reshape the political system. The Cameron era, the Osborne era is gone. Now you need to change colours. You need to embrace this. And I remember really vividly the likes of Ian Dale, the likes of Gavin Barwell, the likes of Tim Montgomery, the likes of Matthew Parris, the likes of Danny Finkelstein, the likes of Ian Martin, Fraser Nelson, Seb Payne. The whole kind of Tory liberal elite class was saying, no, the future is social liberalism, right? If the Conservatives be a Conservative party, oh, God forbid, that'll turn us into Nigel. Matthew Parris symbolised this when he wrote the infamous column in 2014. Clacton is going nowhere. Go back and read that piece online. It's crazy. He basically says if you live in Clacton, Like, you're old, you're white, you represent the past. If the Conservatives lean into Clacton, it's over, it's game over. So, you know, the Liberals were saying, go the Liberal way, right? Without actually understanding what I was trying to say in 2016 was, that's like a 10 to 15% position. If you are basically comfortable with mass immigration, comfortable with porous borders, open borders, comfortable with, you know, putting individual rights above the nation, if you basically only talk to university graduates, you live in London, Oxford or Cambridge, and you want more refugees and you're down with LGBTQP, DSP plus Q, whatever, that is a 10 to 15% position. That's the reality, okay? Now, if instead you understand that the gravity of politics have now moved, and the future of politics, particularly on the right, is national conservatism, protect our borders, bring down migration, represent the national majority over minority interests, tough on law and order, not just building a London-based economy, you're going to reshape the system. Now, what happened is Boris Johnson didn't understand the realignment, got completely smoked. Nigel's now stepped into that space and he's saying, well, I'm going to be that guy. I'm going to realign the system. And the difference, I think, between Nigel Farage and everybody else I just mentioned is Nigel actually believes it. Like, he's actually going to lean into this space. And, you know, I get the criticism that people have been putting out, you know, after certain recent podcasts and saying, well, you know, have reform, you know, gone soft on issues X, Y, Z. Those people don't really know who Nigel Farage is, right? I think 100% reform are going to take on this elite consensus, take on this liberal establishment, and ultimately, I think, reshape this country in a way that I personally agree it needs to be reshaped.
The humble bee, a keystone species crucial to the survival of Earth's inhabitants. Here's how things would look if bees vanished. And here's how they'd look if humans vanished. But imagine if instead we became a keystone species by doing things the right way, by taking responsibility for our actions and becoming the solution. Iron mines the world's most responsible currency the right way. Because the future depends on it.
Look, I understand why we drifted more liberal. I understand it. I understand the what people wanted to achieve, what they wanted from the country. But we've got to a point where everything feels broken. In every single direction we're looking, everything feels broken. People are poorer. Town centres have been hollowed out. Our town centre is full of crackheads and alcoholics, shoplifters. We all see the Twitter videos of people going to Greggs and stealing stuff and Tesco's. I mean, every Tesco's now seems to have an issue where they're having to have the screens up, and you see more of goods where you can't actually take them out. You've got to go and ask someone to get it. So all that shit. And we have political parties that aren't really addressing the problems that people on the street are talking about. And I think the thing about Nigel is he's not being afraid to just stand up and say things that might get certain people cancelled for saying it on Twitter. He doesn't care.
But yeah, but you need to be, I think, clear about what all of those things are symbolic of. They're all symptoms of a deeper problem. And that problem is the fact that contemporary liberalism basically wants us to live in a society where there are no guardrails. What matters in this new version of liberalism is the liberation of the individual, right? So you don't have nations, you don't have tough on crime policies, you don't have borders, you don't have strong families, you don't have a sense of morality. And so what you're left with is this very hollow, very vacuous society symbolized by broken borders, the spread of OnlyFans, the legitimization of pornography and the sexualization of our children, that is symbolized by unprecedented amounts of legal mass migration, the fact that we are, nobody in the political class seems to be wanting to even ask questions about the mass rape of our own children in this country. The guardrails have all gone. And what people, I think, out there are yearning for, it is a sense that actually, human beings need guardrails.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we're not good when everything just collapses around us and it's like, hey, you're an individual, go have fun. Because we make, I think, terrible choices. And the choices are, I think, embodied in, the likes of Lily Phillips, but also the borderless world that we're now living in, where our leaders don't seem to care that we are literally allowing Iranian terrorists to come into our country illegally, and taxpayers are putting them up in housing while the British people cannot themselves get housing. It's so obscene what is happening in this country. I mean, just one example, Keir Starmer and the Labour government are actually bankrolling with taxpayers' money private companies like Serco to offer more favourable contracts to landlords to take illegal migrants over British people. So they're using the British people's money to outbid the British people in the housing market. Now, that just blows my mind, because in what civilized, modern, fair society is that allowed to take place? Well, the answer is a society where you have no guardrails, where your leaders believe in universal liberalism. Everybody is of the same value. We should not give preference to the people who have lived in this country for decades, whose parents and grandparents and their parents have contributed to the collective pot over decades. That is a world in which there is an obsession with equality, but there is a complete disinterest in the people who have actually built this country. And that flies in the face of what a lot of people in this country believe. It's also morally unjust, it's unfair, it's grotesque, and nobody in Westminster is calling it out. The only person who's called it out is Nigel Farage on Reform. Now, this
Why
is...
not,
this
though?
is
Why do you think... Do you think they've got a poor theoretical framework? Or do you think they recognise fully what's happening, they lack the integrity and courage to do anything about it? Because I try and understand. My son Connor, right? We were in the pub the other night talking about this. And I was talking about all the issues, economic, moral, social decay, and what I would do to make a change. And he asked me the fair question. He said, well, if it's that obvious, Dad, if everyone can see the country's falling apart, why aren't our politicians doing anything about it? Why isn't Keir Starmer doing anything about it?
So I think some people are trying to do something about it. And again, I go back to people who are challenging the liberal establishment. But I think the reality is that a lot of people in Westminster either don't have the intellectual bandwidth to even understand what's going on in the country, because our political class has deteriorated visibly over the last 20, 30 years. They don't care about it, or it's not simply part of their radical, progressive, social liberal value system. I mean, one of the things that I found particularly shocking, pretty much since January 2025, take the rape gang scandal, because I do think it's really important. It's a symbol of this issue. You have a situation where hundreds of thousands of young white girls have been, raped en masse by Pakistani Muslim gangs, and the leaders of your country cannot even be bothered to hold a dedicated statutory national inquiry that compels witnesses and has the power to punish people in office, like the social workers and the police officers who turned a blind eye. All right, what kind of country are you living in? Well, here's a thought experiment. Imagine how that same political elite, media elite, cultural elite, not just in Westminster, the museums, the galleries, the universities, the publishing industry, the BBC, would have responded. Emily Maitlis, Alistair Campbell, Rory Stewart, how would they have responded if gangs of white working class men were found to be driving in and out of Muslim neighborhoods, putting Muslim girls on heroin, cocaine, and alcohol, gang raping them, telling them it is because they are Muslim that they are doing that, it is because they are not white that they are doing that, and trafficking those girls across the country? Can you for a second imagine the total and utter meltdown that the elite class would have? It would make Windrush and Grenfell and George Floyd and Stephen Lawrence, it would make all of those events look completely insignificant. So what is at the heart of this which everybody out there can see, except people in Westminster, is this profound, palpable notion of unfairness, that you now give more of a shit about minorities than you do the hardworking, law-abiding, tax-paying British, English majority who have governed and created these islands for generations. And I really, really think this issue is such a powerful symbol of everything we're talking about. It's the same reason why Keir Starmer came back from India celebrating a trade deal and did not have the power or the insight to understand why people in this country might be a bit annoyed that he'd given tax exemptions to Indian workers that were not given to British workers. You know, it's that sense of whose side are you on? Because you're supposed to be on our side. You know, you're asking us to pay £15 billion over the next 10 years to house and accommodate people who are breaking our laws, but you're taking winter fuel payments off our pensioners. Whose side are you really on? These are the questions that I think people in this country are asking. I know whose side I'm on. I'm on the side of the British, the English people. I believe in the principle of national preference. I believe that in everything from our housing to our economy to our culture, we should prioritize and push forward the people who've created one of the most remarkable nations in the history of nations. Those people should be prioritized. We have housing available, it should go to those people and their children. We have social housing, it should go to those people and their children. That's not a difficult political choice. But for many people in Westminster, it is, because it flies in the face of their universal liberal outlook, which says everybody is equal and all cultures are equal, which is absolute nonsense, because if all cultures are equal, why are so many people trying to come here? And if all cultures are equal, why is it that only ours in the West has produced the most prosperous, civilized, advanced, developed nations the world has ever known?
All right, there's a lot there.
But
no, I appreciate it. Look,
it's what people out there, I think, can all sense, because we are, Peter, without pushing it too far, I genuinely think we're at a civilizational moment where the question of who are we,
I think we are,
really
and as a nation, I just, there's more and more reasons to leave. You know, somebody has a business or businesses, there's more and more reasons to leave. Safety, taxation. I don't mind paying tax. How much do you pay tax? I just don't want to see it squandered and pissed away on all kinds of stupid shit. But I get it, and I think that's what's happened is it's become acceptable to talk about these things when before it was kind of socially unacceptable to talk about these things. And more people are talking about it because I think more and more people are feeling poorer, unsafe, unwelcome in their own country. I get it. I'm with you on that. I'm also then thinking about, so what happens? How do we solve that? How do we solve this in a way whereby if there's clearly an issue with Pakistani rape gangs, we're happy to say it. We stand up and say it. There's a cultural issue there. They've been exploiting, raping, attacking young girls, but at the same time, not make it just an issue of race, because that can divide us.
Absolutely.
And how do we make so as we rebuild this country, that everybody who is here currently feels safe and happy to be here? How do we become more united as a country? Because, you know, in the end, it's like, it's even making this show. It's easy to make shows of the problem, and they'll do great. Whenever you talk about the problem, they do great. When you start talking about the solutions, they don't do so well.
Okay, well, just before we get to... Let's talk about the solutions, but just before we do, you know, we're talking now in May 2025, right? We just had the government's release the latest data on what is happening in this country. So your question of, okay, how do we actually build a stronger country? I think absolutely that's the question, and we'll answer it on the show. But just before we do, how on earth could you even think about building a strong, unified country given the pace of scale and change that the Labour government and the Tories have presided over since 2020 alone? Here are just a few things we've learned in May 2025. 1 in every 25 people in Britain, 1 in every 25 people you see out there on the street arrived in the last 4 years. 1 in every 25. Net migration has added 5.5 million people to this country in the last 5 years. 5.5 million. Last year, in 2024, our net migration rate was 431,000, right? Down considerably on previous years. But in the same year, we built 218,000 homes. We're not even coming close to dealing with this issue, right? I write about all of this on the Substack. you look at who's coming in. Okay, you're an entrepreneur. You got a podcast. You're into crypto. You built a business, right? Great.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you were from, Azerbaijan, I'm like, you're a creator. You're high skill. You're generating tax revenue. This is, you're supporting the system. So long as we keep the numbers at manageable levels, maybe let's say net migration levels of under 50,000 a year, and we get the high skill, like I don't really have that much of an issue. I don't have a problem with that. But if you look at the latest data that's just come out,
they said it's down to 400,000, right?
Net migration is 431,000. But if you look at the 3.5 million people who have come in recent years, 14%, 1/4, came in mainly to work. The rest are the relatives of those workers, students, the relatives of students, asylum seekers, illegal migrants, refugees, 14%. As an economic experiment, on what level does that make sense?
None at all.
So why am I, and why are young professionals in Westminster, London, Manchester, Liverpool, Birmingham, Wales, we're all like getting up in the morning, right? The alarm clock's going off. We're going off to work. We are hustling. We are making money. We are paying tax. On what level is this social contract making sense for us?
It doesn't make any sense.
Doesn't make any sense at all.
Sense.
So let's just have a frank conversation. It makes no sense. So this religion in Westminster, immigration is great. Everything's wonderful. Keep going. Keep working. Meanwhile, we've got 9 million British adults on out of work benefits. And we've got 1 million young people not in employment at all. So then you say, how do we build a strong society? I think Reform don't yet have all the answers, but they've come closer than anybody else to figuring it out.
Mm-hmm.
We need an immediate freeze on all non-essential migration. And by essential, I mean migration that is contributing to the NHS. Because most of the people coming in, contrary to what you hear on the BBC, are not high-skilled doctors and medical professionals, okay? They represent about 0.8% of all visas that we give out, okay? We freeze all non-essential migration. We dramatically reduce overall levels of immigration going forward, and we revert to a high-skill policy. I genuinely want the best of the best. Engineers, doctors, wealth creators. I want taxes on wealth creators, on prosperity generators, on wealth drivers reduced. I want those people coming here, not leaving in the largest number for any country except Russia right now.
I thought it was China.
Well, Russia, China, it's not good,
yeah.
Right? You can see it in the data too. About 80,000 Brits left last year.
I've said it on this show. All the rich people I know are either left or planning to leave.
Yeah, but let's be honest. Just on that leaving point, let's be honest. Let's say, you leave tomorrow and you take your show to Dubai and, you sat down, or you got the digital nomad visa, or you're paying the 3% and you're on Instagram and you're saying, wow, look at my life. UK is over. Let's be frank, though. There is still going to be a moment for every Brit, for every Englishman, where they're going to look themselves in the mirror at the end of the day and they're going to know they left their home. And they're going to wish it had been different. And they're going to wish that they could have changed it. And they could have done something to turn these islands around. Because however, we all know the story, however much fun, however much, enjoyment you find in those environments, when you're away from your home and you're away from your, the place that gives you that deeper sense of belonging, right?
Yeah.
There's a vacuousness that creeps in. There's a hollowness that creeps in. So I think the plan is, let's do whatever we can to fix our borders. Let's leave the European Convention on Human Rights. Let's reform the Human Rights Act. Let's have a factory reset. That's what I'm calling a factory reset. Let's basically go back as far as we can to what we had in 97 before New Labour came in. And what I mean by that is, let's return to our common law tradition, okay? Let's overcome the politicization of our legal system, two-tier policing, an activist judiciary. Let's reform or repeal the Equalities Act, which is mainstreaming wokeism in all of our institutions. Let's say the era of mass uncontrolled immigration is over. We want to fix our welfare system. We want all Brits getting back to work. Then we'll talk about migration. But right now, we want to fix our society. We've done more than anybody else, I think, in the Western world to help refugees, to help Ukrainians, Hong Kongers, Afghans. We've done our bit. We need to fix our society now. We'll come back to you in a bit. Thank you. But we're going to focus on us for a little bit. Let's get that factory reset going on. Let's get real about crime. Let's take all the money that we're going to spend over the next decade on housing and accommodation for illegal migrants, 15 billion. Let's build 10 more hospitals, or let's build some more prisons. Let's get a growth strategy going in this country because we have no comparative advantage relative to the EU. In fact, Keir Starmer is so bad, he's just signed us up to a Brexit reset deal, which is given, with no democratic mandate, the European Union and the European Court of Justice the ability to influence and determine our policies around food, around energy, fishing, without any democratic mandate. It's the opposite of what Brexit was all about. And underlying that is the fact that these people don't have the confidence to believe that we can do something as a country.
Mm-hmm.
They want us to be subordinate to some other bloc. But I think we can be great as a country. I really do. So we need this factory reset. That's what I'm calling. Let's get back. And it's not about nostalgia. We had a great settlement pre-New Labour, really good settlement. Let's get that going. Let's get a growth strategy in this country going. Let's get serious about actually turning this country around. I think we can do it. You just showed it on your chart there. Reform number 1 in the polls. If you said to me 10, 15 years ago, Nigel Farage and Reform would be number 1 and the Tories would be on 16%, and the next Prime Minister of this country will be somebody that the establishment has laughed at for the last 25 years, I literally would have laughed you out of this room.
I'd have laughed you 3 years ago.
Right.
I just couldn't have seen it happening 3 years ago.
But it's happening now.
Yeah, it's happening. It is happening.
Unless something fundamental changes, Nigel Farage will be the next Prime Minister of this country. And knowing him as well as I do, I think that will open the door to wholesale, radical change in this country. A lot of which the establishment will hate. If you think you saw an establishment backlash with Liz Truss, you ain't seen nothing yet. They will do everything they can to disrupt and delay and disturb a reform government. They will do everything. But the other quality about Nigel Farage that I would just point out is they've thrown everything at that guy since he popped his head up in the early 1990s, and he keeps on going.
Well, he keeps getting proven right. The one thing that bothers me is where people blame him for the outcome of Brexit. And it's like, how fundamentally stupid are you? Yes, he campaigned for Brexit, but he didn't write the policies. He wasn't in government. That was a fumble to me by the Tory government.
Yeah, but it's also as insane as these people who think Boris Johnson is going to save the Tories. It's like, dude, this guy wrecked our country. He wrecked our country. I mean, he was brought in on this incredible mandate to revive left behind areas, lower migration, and give us that big boost. And he did the exact opposite of all of that. I mean, he literally hollowed out our national economy. And I think the one thing that few people understand about Boris that they need to know is he even removed the requirement for British companies to advertise jobs for British workers before advertising them overseas. That is how much of a bohemian liberal Boris was. Like, he genuinely did not give a toss about prioritizing British workers. If the Tories bring him back, like, game on, they're dead. Like, somebody flick the switch, you're not on live sport. Like, it's over, it's finished.
It's very important that you don't lose this, okay? This is your inheritance through Bitcoin.
Let Bitcoin rip. Don't rip up your Bitcoin. Set up inheritance with Casa.
I kind of think they're cooked as it is. And actually, look, I don't mind Kemi. I've watched some of her PMQs. I think she's done okay sometimes. There's nothing enough in there. There's no, like I say, the blueprint's simple. The people want a hard shift. They want a hard stop. They want a hard change, and we're not seeing it. With reform, I guess one challenge is finding 300 suitable candidates within 3 years. That's going to be a challenge.
Well, the first thing, I mean, Kemi Badenoch has actually not even stabilised the Conservative Party. She's made it weaker. Party's gone further behind in the polls than when she became leader. So the other thing is, just before people start speculating about, well, maybe somebody could save the Conservatives, like, they're in a total political, electoral, philosophical cul-de-sac. Even if they change leaders, they're going to get decimated in Wales next year. They will no longer be a national party. They're nowhere in Scotland. even if somebody like, I don't know, Robert Jenrick or someone on the right of the party were to take over, the Conservative Parliamentary Party is dominated by One Nation liberals who won't let that leader do what they need to do in order to reconnect. They have no comeback story. It's like such a toxic brand. It's done. So I don't think there's going to be any comeback in a big way. That's why...
defections?
Well, that's when things get interesting. So let's say Reform win the elections in Wales, right? Which I was in Wales 2 weeks ago, and like the energy is through the roof over there. Like it's like the beginning of a political revolution. I mean, it's great. Like people are just absolutely fed up. If Reform do really well in Wales and the Tories realise time's up, Nigel Farage then has a really interesting decision to make, because he is going to be flooded with very prominent, experienced, competent, conservative politicians on the right of the party, okay, who are going to say, look, I now stand a better chance of holding my seat as a reformer than as a Tory. What Reform need to do is think very carefully about who they take, and here's what I would be advising them to do. For every conservative they take, who is serious, competent, and ideologically aligned, like, you need a pledge sheet. I reject the legacy of the Tory governments between 2010 and 2014. Like, straight up. You need to do what the NRA do in America. There's a pledge card you've got to sign. I reject everything the Tory governments did between 2010 and 2014. I reject the policy of mass uncontrolled immigration. I reject our membership of the European Convention on Human Rights. I believe Britain can prosper outside of the European Union. I believe in the principle of national preference, right? Like, no messing around. If you're going to get down with us, like, you sign this pledge card, right? And our voters will hold you, our members will hold you to account on that. The second thing Nigel should do, for every Conservative he takes, he should take somebody from the traditional old left, right? Like an old Labour person.
What, like a Galloway?
Not George Galloway. Somebody from the other side of the political spectrum. Somebody who has given up on the idea that Labour's representing the working class. Somebody from outside of politics, an influencer, a celebrity, a politician, whatever. Because you've got to think carefully about where this is going. Reform is neither left nor right. It's above party politics.
Yes.
If it starts to be seen as a Tory tribute act, if it's, oh, here's Suella, oh, here's Robert Jenrick, oh, here's, and they all start rolling in, the Red Wall, the North East, Wales, will look at this and they'll say, hang on, it's just the Tories.
Yeah.
It's becoming a Tory party. And if you look at the top 100 seats that are most friendly for reform, 2/3 of them are Labour held.
Right.
So you have to, if you're going to do defections and attract people, you're going to have to do it in a very varied way. Okay. You're going to have to be holding those press conferences saying, this week, tonight, Matthew, I'm going to be, a reform new defector and I'm from the Conservatives. The next week, well, I'm a disgruntled ex-Labour person, but now I can see that we need to leave the ECHR and we need to get control of our borders. The next week, well, I'm not actually in politics. I'm a celebrity, but I've seen, the BBC from the inside and I'm sick to the back teeth of yada, yada, yada. The next week, well, I'm just Joe Bloggs, but you might know me from this thing. I'm joining Reform. They need to do that to project to the people that it is not a one-sided sort of Tory tribute type party. Now, if they do that, sky's the limit. I think 30% is the start. I think if we came back and actually had a conversation maybe a year from now and things will keep going their way, small boat numbers are still going up, migration's out of control, economy's flatlining, cost of living is still really high, there's no reason why they're not going to start doing what Five Star did in Italy. They'll be on 35-40%.
When parties have started to do well, new parties, different parties considered more to the right, the attacks become quite strong. The attacks against these parties become quite strong. Do you have any fear that the media establishment is also going to be kind of weaponizing itself against it, or do you think they're cooked as well? I mean, are we essentially burning it all down now? BBC's done, traditional parties are done. We're in a whole new era.
I'll tell you what, someone said this to me yesterday, and I think it's true. Do you know who's the accelerationalist here? This idea of accelerationalism, you just kind of like move fast and break things. Keir Starmer. I'm convinced. That guy's like a hardcore accelerationist because he's just
breaking everything.
He's just like, yeah, man, small boats. Yeah, let really bad trade deals.
More taxes.
Yeah, let criminals out early. Yeah, what's two-tier policing? No problem. It's just move fast and break things. And I think, or it's just bad politics. And the other thing about Starmer is both Starmer and the people around him, like they're clearly really bad at politics. Like you're in communications, you manage PR, press. Like, how did it not become clear to anybody in number 10 that on that India deal, giving tax exemptions to Indian workers that you're not giving to British workers, you might want to mention that. Like, you might want to kind of, put some defensive mechanisms in place. The fact that the media had to read that from the India press release rather than the UK, like, how did you not see that was going to be an issue? Or the EU Brexit deal, like selling fishing communities up and down these islands, sending them down a river, giving 12 years of access to EU member states to our fishing waters. Like, how did you not think that was going to be an enormous issue?
We get e-gates.
Yeah, we get, the professional middle classes get e-gates and their kids get to go to the EU on Erasmus programs. But like, you know what Starmer just did? He just basically added 5 points to the reform vote in every coastal constituency across this country. If I was Nigel Farage, I would just be announcing a tour of coastal England and Scotland. I'd just be like, right, okay, I'm going to speak to every single fishing village up and down these islands. And like, if the press want to come along. Because it's just bad politics. It's like the first serious thing you do is winter fuel payments. You pull them. The first thing you do that frames your entire government is you take winter fuel payments off pensioners to save 1.5 billion while you're sending hundreds of billions to Northern Africa and the Middle East because you think you can stop migration upstream.
Did you see that Guardian article last week about Rachel Reeves? Productivity has dropped so much within government. They need to, 92,000 more employees? So she needs 92,000 more employees for them to be able to hit their targets because productivity's dropped so low, and that's going to cost her an additional, 5 billion?
Yeah, it's great.
I genuinely, I think Keir Starmer's the worst prime minister of my lifetime, my memorable lifetime.
Yeah,
I cannot. I think
I'd
not
agree.
the most destructive.
I would agree with that.
I think Tony Blair was the most destructive for what he did. But in terms of
Blair, you know what? I disagreed with 75% of everything Tony Blair did, but he was a formidable politician.
Yeah, and he
different level.
Yeah, the nation felt good at the time, and I'm not a Labour voter. Here you go. UK may need 92,000 extra public workers if fallen productivity continues to 2030. It's just like how.
I don't think Rachel Reeves will be Chancellor by the end of the year. I don't think Keir Starmer will be leader by the next general election. I certainly don't think Kemi Badenoch will be. It'd be interesting.
I've got bets on both. Well, I tell you who I think on both. So, I think it'll be generic on the Conservatives, but I think it's going to be Andy Burnham on the Labour.
The thing with generic though is, like somebody once said, you can take an injection for weight loss, but you can't take an injection for personality, and I think there's an underlying issue there in that I think there are two things with Jenrick. One is there is no charisma. The second is he's not as strong as he thinks he is. If you look at all of his social media metrics, they're not actually that good. For somebody who's supposed to be an insurgent politician on the right, he's not connecting. He's a Westminster story.
Yeah, but who else is there?
No, there's no. The Tories are dead. It's dead. It's over. It's finished.
And
then you've got this question of, okay, how do you do business with what's left? Like, who do you take? I think there are half a dozen Conservatives.
Who do you like?
I would want to take.
Is there anyone you particularly like?
Yeah, I think there are really good people in the Conservative Party who really understand what you would need to do to change some of the issues that we've been talking about. I could sit here and name names.
Go on then. Or give me one.
I think Nick Timothy's a really great guy. I think he really understands the country. I think Katie Lamb's good. She's been in the Home Office. She's got very courageous. She's spoken out against issues like the rape gangs. That takes guts.
But didn't they, when she spoke about it in Parliament, they cared more about her language, choice of language.
Oh, other politicians did. Yeah, politicians. But whatever. She at least,
I like her.
Put her colours to the mast.
Do you know the story of her parents? Her parents were both Labour voters who met handing out Labour flyers. Thought it was quite interesting. I quite like her.
I think there are other people who have really just, gone out there. I do think Suella was really important for this country at certain points. I think she spoke the language that most people recognise, you know, the idea that it's a bit like this Starmer thing, you know, island of strangers, right? Yeah. He comes out, he says, well, we are at risk of becoming an island of strangers, at which point most people are like, at risk? Dude, like, look around. We're already there. Yeah. Westminster, SW1 London have a complete meltdown. How could he say this? He's a new Enoch Powell, right? That's what, you know, the rest is politics crowd was sort of saying, you know, this guy's language, I don't like it. YouGov poll, 53% of Brits agree with Keir Starmer. More in common. Almost half the country say, I feel like a stranger in my own country. 73% among Reform voters. So again, you've got this complete and utter mismatch. You know, what Starmer was saying was like what my PhD supervisor once called a SOBO, a statement of the bloody obvious. Yes, we're becoming an island of strangers. Like, no, you know, no shit, Sherlock, we're there. But in London, it's like, oh God, how could he say that? You know, Ian Dale. So it's like, oh God, how could this person possibly say something so outrageous? Whereas you speak to like any cab driver out there in the streets of London, they're like, yeah, dude, yeah, that happened like 10 years ago. It's like multiculturalism has failed. David Cameron, 2010. Angela Merkel, Nicolas Sarkozy. They were, again, a SOBO. Like, it was obvious to everybody. Multiculturalism has failed. The state policy has failed. When Suella said it, like 18 months ago, like London had a complete meltdown. Mm-hmm. Sadiq Khan was like, no, multiculturalism is working really well. It's like, what? Dude, there are neighbourhoods in London where my Jewish friends cannot go. Like, it's a pretty good indicator multiculturalism is not working. And we've gone backwards in many respects in the debate. The things that were statements of the obvious 15 years ago are now sort of like considered to be violating this religion of diversity and multiculturalism.
But it is breaking.
Do you think?
I think the cracks are there. I think the next step is enough people feeling confident to have these conversations in public. Because I know people are having it in private, but I know there are people who are scared of certain things. Like, I'll give you a great example. The trans issue, right? I own a football club.
You own a football club?
Yeah, I own a football club. In Bedford, I own a 7th tier football club. And we have a women's team.
Okay.
And we became aware there was a trans player playing for another side. And I don't, you know, I'm fairly liberal myself. I've got no issue with trans people, whatever. But I was completely against the idea of a trans player because, one, it's more dangerous. And two, it's unfair. It's taking places away from young girls who want to play. I was just that's my theoretical framework. I went around football speaking to people, players. I went around speaking to managers, club owners. There wasn't a single person who disagreed with what I said. So I was going to go public. I wanted to say, like, we as a football club, we are going to ban trans players from our side, and we will refuse to play any team that has a trans player. Mm. This would go against the FA rules. The FA guidelines were you had to have one test a year, whatever test it was, and if you pass it, you could play. And we were going to, and I know what was going to happen. I would have got fined, suspended, banned, whatever the combination of actions against me, and an attempt to cancel me. But I can't be cancelled because, like, I own all my businesses. Fuck off. But I was willing to do it. But what happened was certain people I'd spoken to said, you're going to cause problems for other people. We're going to get attacked as a club. We're going to be, whatever. Then what's happened? The rules have changed and people now feel comfortable talking about it. So some people, I think there's a lot of people privately who know what's going on in the country. They agree, but it's a bit like your question time thing in the green room. Somebody said to you, they're not totally comfortable with saying things publicly.
I definitely agree with that. So I write a newsletter, a blog, and we've seen probably like this show.
Your Substack's great.
Yes, thank you. But we've seen a really big growth rate over the last 2 years. And a lot of the feedback that we get from subscribers is, well, I'm not going to read this anywhere else. And a lot of the stuff we do is like, here's a government report that's literally telling you how the country is going to change over the next 20 years. But the BBC is not talking about it for obvious reasons, sort of challenges the kind of zeitgeist. Well, here's the information you need to know. And this is one of my pet grievances, like misinformation and disinformation are words that the elite class are using to try and control the public debate and discourse so that you do not challenge the liberal orthodoxy in the institution. So you are misinformed if you critique mass migration, or you ask tough questions about Axel Ruder Cabana and his family. You are disinformed if you say, hey, hang on, isn't migration increasing crime? You know, freedom of information requests show that quite clearly. Foreign nationals 3.5 times more likely to be arrested for sexual assault and rape. Afghans, Eritreans, 20 times more likely than British nationals. This makes people feel uncomfortable, but it's true. And as Aldous Huxley once said, facts don't change if you ignore them, right? It's just true, right? Based on the information we've got. So why isn't the state giving us this information? Why is it? I mean, I wish I didn't have to get up every day and write blogs that I sometimes find profoundly depressing. Like, we should deport dual nationals who rape our kids. Like, that should be just...
That's so controversial.
Yeah,
man.
but that should just be... That's an
HDC
YouGov polled that, right? 77% of Brits support that. If you hold British and Pakistani nationality and you are convicted of being part of a rape gang, 77% of Brits say you should be deported from the country, okay? To me, again, that's a SOBO, statement of the bloody obvious. So why am I having to write that? Why is that not being pushed by the government of the day? You know, why are the institutions not saying that? Why is the Labour Party not saying that? We know why the Labour Party is not saying that, because it depends on Pakistani communities, Muslim communities for votes at general elections. But what is right and what is fair and what is moral are different things, right? So why is the state not being open with people about this? Why are they not sharing this? Yvette Cooper is saying, well, after Southport, everyone's far right. You're all misinformed. She is still, to this day, not committed to making all data they have on criminality by immigration status available to Brits on a 6-month annual basis. They just will not release all of that information. They'll release a little bit to make you think they're doing it, but they won't release all of the data they have. But they still accuse you of misinformation.
But these are complex issues, and us peasants don't understand them.
But this is where I just start to think there is, you know, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I start to think, okay, the British state, obviously it needs complete, root and branch reform, because there is definitely, without doubt, an attempt underway to try and conceal information from the tax-paying public. You saw it. I'll give you one last example. Do you remember after Southport, you had all of the newspapers with the same picture saying, Britain comes together to reject the far right because of this idea that the protests and the rioting had been kind of organized by far right groups on Telegram.
Yeah.
So like a month ago, we had the police report into Southport, which concluded there was no organized far right network. Yet, curiously, on the same day, a few days after Southport, every national newspaper had the same picture saying Britain comes together to reject the far right. Like, it's obvious what's going on, right?
Of course, yeah.
It's an attempt to control, to kind of pacify, suppress. I understand that. We know there's a unit in the Home Office that do that. Okay, we know that. But now the police are coming out and they're saying, well, there was no organised far right network. This was just spontaneous protests from basically men, women and children who were like, I don't really want our kids being massacred at Taylor Swift dance classes by guys who have just come into the country. We don't know where they're from. You're not fixing our borders. You're making us feel unsafe. And yet it got wrapped into this narrative about this highly organised, threatening far right that doesn't clearly exist in this country on the level the elite class would like us to think it exists.
Do you think it's just a control issue? They know they're losing control. It's just, they're trying to control the PR.
Of course it is. It's a censorship complex. I mean, if you look at non-crime hate incidents, we wrote about that too. We made the case this is why you should abolish them. And if people out there don't know what these things are, go and look at them. If someone was watching this conversation and they think, well, Matt Goodwin just said something really offensive, and they call up, local police and they say, this guy just was really offensive to one of my protected characteristics, my gender, sexual, racial identity. Yeah. The police will come to my house and they will say, oh, hi, Matt, you've had a non-crime hate incident kind of registered against you. That person doesn't need to give the police evidence. The police will come to my door. A black mark will be put on my record. And if I go for a job at, say, the BBC or a university, they can ask for my record and they will see, I'm on a list. Now, you might say, well, that sounds crazy. 133,000 non-crime hate incidents in recent years. 6 police officers turning up at the house of 2 parents who complained about their school
in
a WhatsApp group, right?
No.
Insane. Yeah, but dude, it's funny, but it's also really chilling.
Well, I don't know why I've not been. I don't know. Why
I'm sure you do have
I say a
something.
lot of stupid shit.
I'm sure you do have something. I'm definitely on a list somewhere.
I'm definitely on a list.
I'm 100% on a list somewhere.
I want to be on the list. That's the coolest.
Yeah.
All my friends are going to be on that list.
But it is, so what I would say, you said, how do we get back to being what we're about? As a country, we were about free speech, free expression, and individual liberty, right? Those were the foundations. So let's scrap all non-crime hate incidents, right? That's what reform should do. In fact, let's scrap all hate laws that have been brought in. We have legislation from the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
If you deliberately incite violence, like you're going to get arrested, you're going to go to prison, okay? We do not need these Orwellian hate laws put on top that are trying to control the supply of information in our society. Because the next step is what we're seeing in France, which is where Marine Le Pen is being blocked from standing. The next step is what we see in Germany, where they almost just classified the most popular party in the national polls as an extremist organization, which therefore would mean any public sector person that joined that party would be liable to lose their job, and that party can be infiltrated by the intelligence services. I mean, it is not a stretch, given what is happening across Europe, to see the British state responding in a similar way to other parties, right, that are challenging the establishment. So this is deadly serious. I really, really believe free speech, free expression are the lifeblood of these islands and always have been. The Labour Party is a radical, progressive, authoritarian party that is opposed to that. And to Labour people who might be watching this and say, well, that's taking it a bit too far. One example, Islamophobia. The definition that Labour want to bring in with Angela Rayner, using Dominic Grieve, the man who tried to shut down Brexit, apparently believes in free speech. The definition of Islamophobia they want to bring in 2018 was designed in an APPG report. You can download it right now if you're watching. Google APPG Islamophobia definition 2018. Specifically mentions two things in that report as an example of Islamophobia. Talking about the rape gangs, or what they call the grooming gangs. So if you talk about them, you're Islamophobic. And the second thing is suggesting there is a demographic threat posed by the expansion of Muslim communities and Islam within Western societies. So let's say this podcast instead was on about the fact that Sweden will be 33% Muslim by 2040, according to reliable forecasts. Someone could call up and say, Matt and Peter have just had a Islamophobic conversation about the expansion of Muslim communities in Western societies.
You just can't talk about it.
It is an attempt to suppress countercultural conversation and commentary. That's why I went to Substack, because I was like, I need to be fully independent from the legacy institutions. I'm serious, because if I tried to write this on, university blogs, if I tried to write the things that I write on the BBC or,
BBC, come on,
left, centre, think tank websites, it's just not going to work. I need to be fully independent and fully insulated in order to be able to write what I write.
Oh, that we definitely need to get you into Bitcoin then, because you need to protect, but you need to protect your money, your bank accounts. You could be self-sovereign. We'll save that. Well,
Nigel was very convincing on that point, on the debanking point.
I mean, I can have, and I have had my bank accounts shut down. I can, but I'm still sovereign. We'll talk about that another day, because I'm conscious of time. Let me ask you about two specific things that have come up in the news recently. I'll be interested in your perspective on that. What about this kneecap thing?
Yeah.
Because my view is, right, firstly, I quite like the film.
I've not seen the film.
It's funny. I'm half Irish. I would definitely be more on the Republican side. I want a united Ireland. I wouldn't promote or celebrate Hezbollah in any way. But at the same time, when I see a musician on stage who's a Republican Irishman, where you've seen, Celtic supporting people from Gaza running around with the flag, I don't think, for the same reason, I don't think terrorism charges should be used against Tommy Robinson. I don't think he should be charged with terrorism charges.
I agree with you. Whenever I see the police intervening in debates like that, my instinct starts kicking it. I just do not think the police should be intervening and shutting down freedom of expression by musical artists. I just don't think that should happen. In the same way, I go further than most people. I do not think anybody in this country should go to prison based on what they write on social media in the privacy of their own home. unless it is a deliberate call to, John Smith lives at this house and I think you should go and murder him. I do not believe anybody who writes on social media in the privacy of their own home should go to prison.
So Lucy Connolly
should not be in prison at all.
Yeah,
Lucy
agree.
Connolly is one of the biggest outrages, I think, in the judicial legal system we've seen for some time. And I won't go into the details of the case because everybody will be familiar with them. But the one thing I would say is, in what kind of country is it fair and just that Lucy Connolly goes to prison for the best part of 3 years, gets a longer sentence than members of the Telford rape gang, while Labour MPs, who literally knocked out their own constituent, do not go to prison. Hugh Edwards does not go to prison. And, I believe in the Christian notion of forgiveness. Lucy Connolly tweeted something that was pretty spicy. She deleted it 4 hours later. She then told people not to get involved in the rioting and the protest. She'd lost a child only a few years earlier. She struggled to process the events of Southport because she knew what those parents were going to feel. That's what I call mitigating circumstances, which the judge didn't take into account. And then we see Labour, with David Lammy, trying to introduce sentencing guidelines that specifically tell judges to take into account mitigating circumstances for minorities. Racial, sexual, gender minorities. Well, I would say Lucy Connolly, with a clean record, having never been in any trouble with the police before, there's a pretty good mitigating circumstance right there. She had lost a child. She responded badly in the heat of the moment. She recognised her mistake. She deleted it, and she got nearly 3 years in prison.
Well, I think blaming her for anyone else's act of violence, I think it's like that argument with Quentin Tarantino. It's like blaming him for someone watching his films. It's the problem of the person who goes and commits the violence. They have to take responsibility. I think it was a stupid tweet. 100%
It was a stupid tweet, but it was also a state. It was a state that was overreaching because it was a state that was panicking. In the same way that Keir Starmer and Yvette Cooper after Southport were panicking. They knew what we know. They knew a lot of things they did not tell us at the time. And Lucy Connolly was, I think, a victim of state overreach.
I think there's more we still don't know, which I can't talk about on here because I'll probably get arrested. I have a different comparison, which I hate. Yeah, I hate the fact that we are charging a musician with under terrorism laws for running around on stage with a flag. And we have someone like Alistair Campbell, who I think is a literal terrorist. I'm probably going to get arrested for this now. But yeah, we know he wrote the dodgy dossier. We know he and Blair sold us into a war that nobody wanted as a legal war. That to me is more definitionally terrorism. And so I just hate this thing where you can get away with doing any shit you want if you're part of this liberal elite. But if you're a creative person, or if you're a Tommy Robinson, or if you're working class, then they'll just shut you down. I hate that.
But it was the same reason as to, Keir Starmer saying he was not on top of the details of the Lucy Connolly case. She goes to prison for nearly 3 years. We have people marching through the streets, literally singing anti-Semitic songs, celebrating Hamas, radical trans activists screaming, "Kill TERFs," and they don't get any real consequences at all. They don't get any treatment comparable to Lucy Connolly. And, I think what you have, symbolised by the likes of Rory Stewart, Alistair Campbell, John Sopel, Emily Maitlis, you kind of have this elite class that has become so remote from the rest of the country, is talking to 10 to 15% of the country over and over again, doesn't really have much interest in trying to understand what the remaining 85% think and feel, doesn't quite understand why their project has been comprehensively rejected from 2016 onwards, doesn't quite understand why Trump is back in the White House, populists are insurgent across Europe, reform is number one in the polls, isn't really that interested in bothering to try and understand why that's happening, and just is so sort of openly narcissistic and morally righteous that they are still basically in this game for self-interest. Like, that's the way I interpret a large part of the elite class. Just, Rory Stewart complaining about Elon Musk's Doge because his wife would lose out on like £1 million of funding as part of an organisation that had gone to Afghanistan to teach conceptual art to women who cannot participate in any meaningful way in Afghan society. It was just like the height of absurdity.
Well, Rory Stewart's gone I mean, ever since, look, I quite liked their podcast when they first launched. I liked hearing that kind of tension between them. But it doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, but okay.
Rory has basically become, Alistair Campbell's little
Well, you have it. They are a symbol of what we're talking about on this show, of the uniparty. They are indistinguishable on almost every major issue.
They didn't used to be.
No, but they are basically both committed to mass migration. They certainly don't see it as an issue. They are both committed to social liberalism. They don't really see it as an issue. They are both basically London-centric. They are overwhelmingly used to and surrounded by other members of the elite graduate class. I just think that's the reality of what's happened. And the great awakening, that a lot of researchers have talked to about how over the last 15 years, members of the ruling class have moved so far to the cultural left. Rory Stewart coming out and saying, well, maybe I'm a Lib Dem now is entirely consistent with that. Like they've, as a unit, as a class in society, they've all moved so far to the cultural left, while the average voter has stayed where they are or has moved even further to the right on cultural questions. So you've got this enormous gulf between the people who are running the institutions that are basically shaping our lives and the rest of us who have to live with the consequences of the decisions that these people are making. And we're like, what the hell's going on here?
So on this podcast, you are definitely hearing me talk about Bitcoin a lot. Well, why? We live in a really strange time with governments driving inflation with their reckless spending and endless money printing. There is a way out of this. There is a way to protect your money, and that is by stacking Bitcoin. I've made loads of shows about Bitcoin. You can go and research this, you can go and read the books, but the truth is, it is the hardest money ever created. If you are interested in protecting your financial future, it's time for you to get on the Bitcoin train. I've been stacking Bitcoin personally and through my businesses since 2017. It's protected me, it's secured my family's future, and it also strengthens all of my businesses. So if you want to start stacking Bitcoin, where do you do it? Well, for me, it's with Gemini. They're a fully licensed, full reserve exchange and custodian, so they give you a secure way for you to buy and own your Bitcoin. There's no risks and no funny business. So if you're serious about stacking Bitcoin the right way, head over to Gemini.com, which is GEMINI.com. What did you make of what happened with Gary Lineker? Because I find that one of the most interesting situations there's been, because he's effectively fired. Yeah, and I'm not asking judgment on what he said or his opinions are, but that the BBC essentially forced him out because he was stepping outside the lane of what is acceptable within that 15.
Well, I've talked to lots of people in the BBC and like top-level BBC people. I think, to their credit, there is an awareness that public trust in the BBC is collapsing so quickly in an environment where there are so many alternatives to the BBC.
Yep.
That they have to be much more proactive at least trying to police, what is neutral and what is openly political, right? I think it's revealing as well that a lot of the people that we were led to believe were neutral journalists, like the moment they leave the BBC, it's like, oh yeah, actually you are as radical as I suspected. Yeah. Oh no, you're even more radical than I suspected, But they were the arbiters of truth. They were supposedly the impartial, neutral journalists, the kind of people that we were relying on for news and information. So I think the BBC is in a public trust crisis, like a lot of the institutions. Universities in America are similar. Public trust and confidence in higher education has never been as low as it is right now. And I think the BBC, it's similar. Public legacy institutions, part of the reason why podcasts like this and others are doing so well, is public trust in the legacy institutions has been collapsing because people have gone through the great financial crash. Mm-hmm. They've gone through the migration expansion. They've gone through the COVID pandemic. They've gone through all of these things that have made them over time sit up and say, man, I really am living in the Matrix. Like, this is crazy.
Yeah. And all we got is this T-shirt.
I didn't even have a T-shirt.
I'm going to bore people with saying this over and over again, but I've spent a lot of time recently looking at the politics of Bedford and issues that we have locally. And then I've been reading a lot about the kind of founding of modern America, the Declaration of Independence, Friendless Papers. Also looking at Swiss models. We just interviewed before you was a guy from Switzerland talking about their models. Do you think we actually need some more kind of constitutional reforms, change the way we govern in this country? Because I certainly see that both of those models recognize that groups of people become powerful, and always the weakness of men is that we abuse that power. And if we don't have any kind of formal change in the way we are constitutionally governing ourselves, we just risk repeating the same mistakes over and over again. Do you think we need to be braver and think about that? Do we need to devolve more power locally?
I don't think devolution is the answer, because if you look at Scotland and Wales, Wales is a real eye-opener for me.
Okay.
If you look at what's happened in Wales under Labour over the last 25 years, half my family are Welsh. Wales has been decimated by devolution. It's been terrible for Wales. In the same way that I don't believe in proportional representation, because there's a reason most academics support PR, and there's a reason a lot of people on the left support PR. It's because if you look at the evidence on PR over the longer term, it tends to deliver left-wing governments. So of course they support it. It delivers much more fragmented, messy, volatile governments, less stable governments. I still believe in the Westminster Model. I believe in the majoritarian system. I just really think we need a government with a mandate strong enough to use that system to do the kinds of things that Tony Blair did when he had that system, that Boris Johnson could have done when he had that system, that Nigel Farage might be able to do if he gets that system, which is decisive, top-down, real change. Now, you can't do that if you send all of the powers down to local authorities, to mayoral authorities, to regions. You need to lead from the front. You need to lead from the centre. And I do still believe in the power of that system. It's just that whoever inherits it next, particularly if they're on the side of the people, they've got to learn the lessons of how to use power. I mean, Trump too has been, whatever you think about Trump, whether you support all the decisions or not, has been a masterclass in shock and awe politics. It's like, I'm ready before I've even won. Someone told me they were with Trump on the night of the election, and he was just like sat around eating ice cream. Wasn't really even paying attention to the television screens, because in his mind, the election was won, it was done, and the policy planning that had gone on for years before he won, the Heritage Foundation, America First Policy Institute, among others, they were like, here you go. Here are your executive orders. Here's your legislation. Here are your advisors. Here are your 3,000 appointments. Nigel Farage now needs that. He needs that playbook, like now. Here's how you leave the ECHR. Here's how you reform the Human Rights Act. Here's how you get rid of net zero. Here's how you reduce the tax obligation. Because there is a risk in all of this, right? Which is, if Farage and Reform win and do nothing with it, and it implodes, the people of this country will never trust an alternative again. There's an enormous risk in all of this. And Farage and Reform now have to sit down and be like, okay, who's in the shadow cabinet? Who's getting this policy brief? Who's designing our foreign policy? Who's designing our levelling up strategy? Who's deciding what we're doing with the BBC? Who's deciding how we're going to reduce the number of universities and invest more seriously in, top tier, how are we going to get more British kids into good paid jobs, and how are we going to treat them with more respect? Why are we offshoring places in medical schools to people from overseas while we've got thousands of British kids who are getting turned down, even though they got straight A's? You can't just walk in and be like, oh, we might do something about that. Day one has to almost be like, we've got the plan, let's go.
It's a huge responsibility. A lot of pressure.
It's the biggest job in the country. I mean, it's enormous, and it's either going to make people or it's going to break people.
But it's bigger than normal. Yeah,
right now it is as well, because everyone can sense. I said on X recently, I wasn't expecting him to pop up in my replies, but I was sort of saying, I think we've really got maximum, 2 general elections left to genuinely turn this country round before it becomes something completely unrecognizable. To which Elon Musk replied, no, you've got 1 election left.
Did he really?
Yeah.
Did you see Charlie Kirk's email? I just tweet yesterday.
Yeah.
The one about go home and kiss the lamb.
Yeah, but everyone in Washington says that. The first question, and not only in America and Europe too, the first thing you get from most people is, what the hell is happening in the UK? For Americans, it's about free speech.
Yeah.
Europeans, it's like, we used to look up to Britain. What on earth's going on?
Well, why haven't you left? Why haven't you got out? why aren't you leaving? Now, I get a lot of that. I mean, I can't, look, I could. It's easy. I can go and live anywhere. But I feel like if too many good people, I'm not saying I'm a good person, but I feel like I need to stay and do my bit, and I think everyone needs to do their bit. And if too many people leave it, we are giving up.
You know what they used to say about the English?
No?
They lose every battle except the last.
Ooh, that's spicy. Right, look, appreciate your time. I appreciate your Substack. I will put it in the show notes. It's brilliant.
Thank you for the podcast as well. I mean, this is all about that ecosystem, that is actually allowing people to share the ideas and the thoughts that are changing culture, and politics is downstream from culture. And I do think actually, not just blowing smoke up your ass, I think a lot of this, these shows really do make a critical difference to that culture. We've got to change the zeitgeist. We've got to change the prevailing mood and the spirit of the age, and that's what this is about.
Well, I'm here for it. Matt, look, appreciate you. Keep doing it. Check out Matt's Substack. It's brilliant. See you later. Bye.